I'm Rachel Mitchell, 32 years old, and the moment I pushed through those heavy courtroom doors, I felt their eyes on me. Mom's perfectly lipstick smile, smug and certain. James, my brother, barely looking up from his phone, boredom etched across his face. They thought this inheritance battle was already won. Dad's company, his fortune, his legacy, all slipping through my fingers. But they didn't notice the folder clutched against my chest or the flash drive in my pocket. They thought this was already over. They had no idea what was coming. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? If you're enjoying this true story of family betrayal and justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph against all odds. Now let me take you back to where it all started. The Mitchell family name used to mean something in this town. My father, William Mitchell, built Mitchell Enterprises from nothing but determination and a small loan from his grandfather. A real estate development company that transformed from a tiny operation into a multi-million-dollar business over 30 years. Dad was a legend in the industry, honest, hardworking, and fair. Everyone who worked with him respected him. Everyone except apparently his own wife and son. Growing up, I was always Dad's shadow. While James was content playing video games or spending Dad's money, I was learning the business. By 15, I could read blueprints. By 20, I was sitting in on major deal negotiations. By 25, I was managing my own development projects. Dad always told me, Rachel, someday this will all be yours to lead. James doesn't have the heart for it. Mom Patricia never liked that. In her world, sons inherited businesses, not daughters. She'd remind me at every family dinner that my place was finding a good husband and starting a family, not playing with buildings. Dad would wink at me across the table. We had our understanding. James was always her golden child. 6 years older than me, he'd tried working at the company multiple times, but he'd either get bored and quit, or Dad would remove him after he'd made some catastrophic mistake. Still, Mom insisted he was just finding himself and would eventually take over. Dad and I knew better. Everything changed 16 months ago. Dad complained of headaches for a few weeks, then collapsed during a meeting. The diagnosis was devastating: glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor. The doctors gave him 6 months at most. During those precious last months, Dad spent as much time as possible preparing me. We reviewed company finances, discussed ongoing projects, and he introduced me to his most trusted business contacts. 3 months before he died, he called his lawyer to update his will. I was present when he clearly stated his wishes. I would inherit controlling interest in Mitchell Enterprises, with smaller shares going to James and Mom. He also arranged for me to become CEO. "Promise me you'll take care of the company, Rachel," he said, squeezing my hand as we sat in his hospital room. "It's not just buildings, it's the people who work there, their families. They're counting on you." "I promise, Dad," I whispered, fighting tears. In his final weeks, things got strange. Mom suddenly restricted my visits, claiming Dad needed rest. When I did see him, he seemed heavily medicated, barely lucid. James was constantly at his side, suddenly the devoted son. Dad died on a rainy Tuesday morning. I wasn't there. Mom had told me not to come until afternoon. By the time I arrived, he was already gone. I didn't even get to say goodbye. The funeral was a blur of faces and empty condolences. Throughout the service, Mom kept her arm linked with James's, both dressed impeccably in designer morning wear. I stood alone. The initial reading of the will came 3 days later. I sat in the lawyer's office, Thomas Brennan, who had been Dad's attorney for decades. As he read, I felt the blood drain from my face. According to this document, James would inherit 60% of the company and become CEO. I would receive 20%, with the remaining shares going to Mom. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice barely audible. "Dad changed his will 3 months ago." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "This is the most recent will we have on file, dated just 4 weeks ago, when your father was still legally competent to make decisions." I turned to Mom and James. Her smile was sympathetic, but her eyes were cold. Your father realized James was ready to take responsibility. He knew you were too emotional to handle something so complex. That's not true, I said, my voice breaking. Dad promised me. Oh, honey, Mom sighed, putting her hand on mine. Your father said lots of things when he was on those medications. You can't hold him to them. He wasn't himself. James nodded solemnly. Rachel, Dad knew what he was doing. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I left that meeting in shock, grief mixing with a growing suspicion that something was very wrong. But in my state of mourning, I didn't yet have the strength to fight. That would come later after I discovered just how deep their betrayal went. The weeks following Dad's death were a systematic dismantling of everything he'd built and everything he'd promised me. James wasted no time installing himself in Dad's corner office, while I was relocated to a smaller space 3 floors down. At first I told myself it was temporary, that surely there was a misunderstanding about the will that would soon be corrected. That delusion didn't last long. Within a month, James began making radical changes to the company. Projects Dad had personally overseen were scrapped. Long-standing relationships with contractors were severed in favor of James's college friends who had dubious credentials but conveniently lower bids. Most disturbing was the treatment of employees. People who had been with the company for decades, people Dad had considered family, were suddenly deemed redundant or not aligned with the new vision. Carol from accounting, who had helped Dad set up the company's first professional bookkeeping system, fired. Michael from project management, who had worked alongside Dad on the company's breakthrough development, let go with 2 weeks severance. When I protested in executive meetings, James would smile condescendingly and say, "This is business, Rachel, not a charity." Dad was too sentimental. Mom, who had mysteriously taken an active role in the company despite having no experience, would nod in agreement. The family home became another battleground. One afternoon I arrived to find moving trucks outside. Workers were carrying out antique furniture, including pieces that had been in the family for generations. "What's happening?" I asked Mom, who was supervising the loading. "Just clearing out some clutter," she replied without looking at me. "Your father kept too many old things. It's time for a fresh start." I spotted Dad's antique desk, the one where I'd sat as a child watching him work, being carried toward the truck. "You can't sell that," I protested. Dad loved that desk. He wanted me to have it. Mom's expression hardened. "I don't recall him saying that, and as the executor of the estate, these decisions are mine to make. If you wanted input, perhaps you should have visited him more during his final days." The cruel inversion of reality, she had been the one restricting my visits, left me speechless. That evening I confronted James at his new downtown penthouse purchased just weeks after Dad's death. "What's really going on?" I demanded. "Dad changed his will. We both know that." James sighed, pouring himself an expensive scotch from what I recognized as Dad's private collection. "Rachel, you need to accept reality. Dad knew I was better suited to run the company." "That's a lie," I said, my voice rising. "You've never successfully completed a single project. You've been fired from the company twice." His expression darkened. "Be careful, sis. You still need my approval for your department budget. Push me, and you might find yourself joining the other redundancies." The threat was clear. Fall in line or lose everything. I might have given up then, if not for 2 people. The first was Barbara Chen, Dad's executive assistant for 15 years. She called me the next day asking to meet at a cafe far from the office. "Something's not right with your father's will," she whispered across the table. "He definitely changed it before he died." I scheduled the meeting with Thomas myself. "And there's something else. Files are missing from his computer. Financial records mostly." The second ally emerged a week later, David Ferguson, Dad's oldest friend and the company's outside legal counsel. He'd been on vacation when Dad died and missed the funeral. Now back, he was disturbed by the changes. "Will called me the day before he collapsed," David told me in a hushed voice when we met in a park. "He was concerned about some unusual activities." James had been pressing him for access to the offshore accounts your father maintained for emergency liquidity, not personal use. These conversations planted the first seeds of resistance in me. But even as I began to consider fighting back, the attacks escalated. At a charity gala Dad had supported for years, I overheard Cynthia Wilson, Mom's closest friend and the event chairwoman, telling a group poor Rachel is having such a difficult time accepting reality. The doctors suggested it might be necessary to consider conservatorship if her behavior becomes more erratic. Patricia is so worried. The implications were clear: challenge the will, and they would paint me as mentally unstable. When I confronted Mom about these rumors, she smiled sadly. "Darling, no one thinks you're unstable. We're all just concerned about how emotional you've been." These grief responses can be quite troubling. "I've scheduled an appointment for you with Dr. Reynolds." Dr. Reynolds, the same psychiatrist who had conveniently declared one of Dad's competitors incompetent during a business dispute years ago. I left the house that day knowing I couldn't trust anyone in my family's social circle. Mom and James had too much influence, too many connections. If I was going to fight, I needed to be smarter and find allies they couldn't intimidate. I moved out of the family home the following weekend, finding a modest one-bedroom apartment across town. Mom feigned concern. James made jokes about my downgrade, but I could see the relief in their eyes. With me gone, there would be no witness to their dismantling of Dad's legacy. Little did they know removing myself from their daily scrutiny was my first strategic move. My new place became command central for what would become a full-scale investigation. I converted the small dining area into an office, pinning timelines and connection maps to a corkboard that soon covered an entire wall. If Mom and James wanted to play dirty, I needed to understand exactly what game they were playing. I started with the company finances. Working carefully to avoid detection, I downloaded historical records during off hours, when the IT department, now staffed with James's college roommate, wasn't monitoring the network. What I found disturbed me. In the 3 months before Dad's death, unusual transfers had been made to consulting companies I'd never heard of. Since James took over, these transfers had increased tenfold. One name kept appearing: Pinnacle Consulting Group. I could find no record of actual work performed by this company, despite payments totaling over $2 million. I reached out to Arnold Patterson, Dad's former business partner who had retired 5 years earlier. We met at his fishing cabin outside town, neutral territory where Mom's spies wouldn't spot us. "I never trusted your brother," Arnold said bluntly, pouring us both coffee on his weathered deck. "Your father kept him at arm's length for good reason. That boy has been looking for shortcuts his whole life." "Do you know anything about Pinnacle Consulting?" I asked. Arnold frowned. "Never heard of them in the industry. But I'm not surprised. James is siphoning money. The company's stock has dropped 15% since he took over. Word is, several major clients are considering pulling their projects." This matched what Barbara had discreetly told me. Employee morale was plummeting, talent was fleeing, and James's reckless decisions were alienating longtime clients. My breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing company registration documents I'd requested from the state, I discovered Pinnacle Consulting had been incorporated just 2 days before Dad's diagnosis. The listed owner, Amanda Winters, James's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Even more damning were the backdated contracts I found in the company archives. Contracts supposedly signed by Dad authorizing the relationship with Pinnacle contained subtle inconsistencies. The signature looked like Dad's, but certain characteristics were off: the pressure points, the angle of the final stroke. Having studied countless documents he'd signed over the years, these discrepancies were obvious to me, if not to others. As my investigation progressed, so did the social isolation. Friends stopped returning my calls. Invitations dried up. At industry events, people who'd known me for years suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere when I approached. The whisper campaign was clearly effective. I overheard fragments: "having a breakdown," and "jealous of her brother." Always been the difficult one. Then came an unexpected olive branch. Amanda Winters, James's girlfriend, and the owner of Pinnacle Consulting reached out, suggesting we meet for coffee to clear the air. Against my better judgment but sensing an opportunity, I agreed. Amanda was everything. I wasn't blonde polished with the practiced charm of someone who'd made social climbing a career. "Rachel, I'm worried about you," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "James says you've been making accusations digging through old files. That's not healthy." "I'm just trying to understand what happened to Dad's original will," I replied carefully. "Oh, honey," she sighed. "We both know your father changed his mind at the end. It happens. The important thing now is family unity. James is even considering creating a special position for you, community relations director. Wouldn't that be perfect? All the charity work, none of the stressful business decisions." I smiled tightly. "That's generous. And how's Pinnacle Consulting doing these days? $2 million in fees must keep you busy." Her expression flickered briefly before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do, Amanda. Just like I think you know exactly what happened to Dad's real will." She stood abruptly. "This conversation is over. James was right, you are unstable." I watched her leave, then noticed a man at a nearby table who'd been pretending to read a newspaper. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away and left soon after Amanda. That night, my apartment was broken into. Nothing valuable was taken, but my files were clearly rifled through. Fortunately, I'd begun keeping the most important evidence in a safety deposit box. The break-in intended to frighten me had the opposite effect. It confirmed I was on the right track and that they were getting nervous. But it also showed me how far they were willing to go. For a moment, sitting in my disordered apartment, I considered giving up. The power imbalance was enormous. They had the money, the connections, the legal standing. I had suspicions and partial evidence. But then I remembered Dad's face when he made me promise to protect his legacy. I thought of the employees being discarded after decades of loyal service. I thought of Amanda's smug smile. "Enough playing defense," I whispered to myself, straightening my scattered papers. It was time to fight back. With my apartment no longer secure, I needed a safer base of operations and more professional help. I used a portion of my savings, what remained after being effectively cut off from family funds, to hire Frank Monroe, a former police detective turned private investigator. His office, a cramped space above a 24-hour laundromat, became my new war room. "Corporate espionage, contested wills, possible forgery," Frank summarized after I'd laid out my case. "And that's before we get to the potential medical manipulation of your father. Your family doesn't mess around with their betrayals, do they?" "Can you help me?" I asked. Frank leaned back in his creaking chair. "It won't be cheap, and it won't be pretty. These types of cases get nasty. Are you sure you're ready for what we might find?" I nodded firmly. "I need the truth, whatever it costs." For the next 3 weeks, Frank meticulously built a surveillance network around my mother and brother. What he uncovered exceeded even my suspicions. "Your mother has been meeting regularly with Thomas Brennan, your dad's lawyer," Frank reported, showing me photographs of them entering a restaurant together. "And not just for legal consultations. These two have history." The photos showed them holding hands across the table, their body language unmistakably intimate. "How long?" I asked, my stomach turning. "Based on my sources, at least 5 years. Well before your father got sick." Another shocking discovery came when Frank followed my mother to a lakeside cabin registered to Dr. Maxwell Stern, Dad's oncologist. "They spent 3 hours there," Frank said, showing me more photos. "And it's not the first time. They have a standing reservation every other Thursday going back at least 2 years. The implications were horrifying. Had my father's medical treatment been compromised? I remembered how heavily sedated he'd been in those final weeks, much more than seemed necessary. How convenient that his mental state had deteriorated just as the new will appeared. While Frank continued his surveillance, I focused on building new alliances. With my reputation being systematically destroyed in our social circle, I needed to find support elsewhere. Jennifer Walters, a junior accountant at Mitchell Enterprises, who had been on the verge of being fired by James, became a crucial inside source. Having witnessed the company's decline under my brother's leadership, she was willing to risk her job to provide me with financial records that weren't accessible through my limited access credentials. "He's running the company into the ground," Jennifer told me, passing a flash drive under the table at our meeting in a busy food court. "3 major projects are behind schedule and over budget. The Westlake development might lose its funding entirely." Through Jennifer, I learned about an executive meeting where James had presented fabricated projections to the board hiding the true state of the company's finances. When the CFO, Dad's longtime colleague, had questioned the numbers, he was removed from the meeting and fired the next day. My most unexpected ally emerged from the shadows of the past. While searching through Dad's old contacts, I found a number for Uncle Robert, Dad's estranged brother, whom I'd met only a handful of times in my life. Their falling out had occurred decades ago, over a business disagreement, and Mom had always discouraged any contact. I called him out of desperation and was surprised when he immediately agreed to meet. Uncle Robert looked strikingly like Dad, the same strong jaw and kind eyes, though his hair had gone completely white. We met at his horse farm 2 counties over. "I always knew Patricia would show her true colors eventually," he said, as we walked along the paddock fence. "Bill was blind when it came to her. Always defended her even when I tried to warn him about her affair with that lawyer years ago." "You knew about Thomas?" I asked, stunned. "Everyone in our circle knew except Bill. He didn't want to see it." He stopped walking and faced me directly. "What exactly do you need, Rachel?" "Resources to fight them legally, evidence of the will tampering, and someone they can't intimidate or buy off." Uncle Robert nodded slowly. "I've got plenty of money and absolutely no love lost for your mother or that brother of yours. But more importantly, I have this." He led me to his office and unlocked a file cabinet, pulling out a folder. Inside was a copy of what appeared to be Dad's original will, the one naming me as primary heir and CEO. "How did you get this?" I whispered. "Bill sent it to me 3 months before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure it found its way to you. I was waiting for the right time for you to be ready." The document wasn't legally binding without the original, but it was proof that Dad's intentions had been exactly as I remembered. Combined with the mounting evidence of forgery and financial misconduct, I finally had enough to consider legal action. That night I returned to my apartment to find the door slightly ajar. Prepared this time, I called Frank before entering. Together we discovered my laptop had been stolen, and the apartment thoroughly searched again. "They're getting desperate," Frank observed, helping me gather the few belongings I planned to take. "You're not safe here anymore." I relocated to a small rental cabin owned by Frank's cousin, completely off the grid. From this secluded location, I prepared for the next phase, taking the battle to court. But before I could file my case, I received a devastating call from Jennifer. During a late-night search of James's office, she'd been caught by security. She'd been fired on the spot and threatened with prosecution for corporate espionage. And then came the final betrayal that nearly broke me. Thomas Brennan, Dad's trusted lawyer, held a press conference announcing a lawsuit against me for harassment and defamation of my family. Standing beside him were my mother, brother, and most shockingly, Frank Monroe. My own investigator had sold me out, providing them with details of every move I'd made and evidence I'd gathered. The folder of evidence I'd entrusted to him was now in their hands. With my support network crumbling and my credibility in tatters, I sat alone in the cabin, closer to defeat than ever before. But as I sorted through what little evidence I had left, copies I'd wisely kept separate, I discovered something I'd missed: an old storage unit receipt among Dad's papers. It was time for one last desperate search. The storage unit was in an industrial area on the outskirts of town, rented under William Mitchell's name, but paid through an automatic withdrawal from an account I'd never seen before. The facility manager recognized Dad's name but required identification before granting access. Fortunately, I still had my driver's license showing our shared last name, which was enough to convince him. Unit 247 contained a treasure trove. Boxes of documents, old computers, and most importantly a fireproof safe tucked in the back corner. The combination my birthday revealed Dad's contingency plan. Inside were duplicates of company documents, external hard drives containing financial records, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in Dad's handwriting, for Rachel, in case of emergency. The letter inside detailed his suspicions about Mom and James in his final months. He'd noticed financial discrepancies, unauthorized access to his personal files, and overly aggressive medication that left him foggy when Mom and James visited, but was mysteriously reduced when I came alone. Most crucially, the safe contained a video recording Dad had made with his attorney, not Thomas Brennan, but Sarah Jackson, a partner at a competing firm. In the video, Dad clearly outlined his wishes for succession, emphasizing my role as his chosen leader for Mitchell Enterprises. "If you're watching this," he said in the recording, looking directly into the camera, "something has gone wrong. Trust Sarah to help make it right." I called Sarah Jackson immediately. After reviewing the video and documents, she agreed to represent me, though she warned that the case would be challenging. "They've established a narrative about you being unstable and vindictive," she explained during our first official meeting. "They've had months to cover their tracks and build support. And with your mother's social connections and your brother's financial resources, they can afford to drag this out." "I don't care how long it takes," I replied. "I promised Dad I'd protect his legacy." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Then let's get to work." We filed a petition contesting the will, along with a separate civil suit alleging fraud, forgery, and financial malfeasance. As expected, Mom and James responded with overwhelming legal force, a team of 5 attorneys from the city's most prestigious firm. The initial hearing was scheduled for early August. Walking into that first courtroom session was one of the hardest moments of my life. The family side of the gallery was filled with familiar faces, business associates, family friends, even my childhood piano teacher, all there to support Mom and James. My side held only Sarah, Uncle Robert, and Jennifer Walters, who had defied their threats to stand with me. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a stern woman with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, reviewed the petitions with evident skepticism. "These are serious allegations, Miss Mitchell," she said, peering at me over her reading glasses. "Forgery, fraud, medical manipulation, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Thomas Brennan, representing my mother and brother, rose with practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, these allegations are the product of a troubled young woman's inability to accept her father's final wishes." Mr. Mitchell clearly recognized that his daughter, while beloved, lacked the temperament and judgment to lead his company. "We have affidavits from Mr. Mitchell's doctor, nurse, and household staff, attesting to his mental clarity when he signed the final will. The medical records we'd subpoenaed were heavily redacted, with key information about Dad's medication schedule conveniently missing. Dr. Stern testified that Dad's medication was standard protocol and any mental fogginess was a natural progression of his condition. Our first major setback came when Judge Harmon ruled Dad's video testimony inadmissible on a technicality. The recording hadn't been properly witnessed according to state law. "This is a sophisticated family with significant resources," Sarah reminded me after that difficult day in court. "They've covered their tracks well, but everyone makes mistakes. We just need to find them." One by one, witnesses I'd counted on backed out. The nurse who had mentioned Dad's unusual medication schedule suddenly couldn't recall those details. The company's CFO, who had questioned James's projections, refused to testify, citing a non-disclosure agreement. The local business journal ran a profile of James titled, "Mitchell Enterprises' New Visionary," portraying him as modernizing Dad's outdated approach. A sidebar mentioned my legal challenge, describing it as a sad footnote to an otherwise smooth transition. Mom gave a tearful interview to the city's lifestyle magazine, lamenting how mental health struggles can tear families apart and expressing hope that I would get the help I need. The weight of their influence seemed insurmountable. Even Uncle Robert began to waver under pressure, calling to say that old business associates had reached out suggesting he reconsider his position for the sake of future opportunities. They're threatening to blackball his horse breeding business, Sarah explained. They're going after everyone who supports you. By September, our financial resources were dwindling. I had sold my car and liquidated my personal investment account to cover legal fees. Sarah had generously reduced her rates, but court costs and expert witnesses were expensive. Meanwhile, James and Mom were bleeding me dry with motion after motion, each requiring a response. They're trying to outlast us, Sarah acknowledged during a late-night strategy session. It's a common tactic when one side has deeper pockets. I was nearly ready to accept a settlement, a small percentage of shares and a position as special advisor, with no actual authority when Jennifer called with news. They're destroying documents, she whispered. James ordered IT to purge financial records from the server tonight. I overheard him telling Mom they needed to clean house before the next discovery request. This desperate act gave us the opening we needed. Sarah immediately filed for an emergency injunction to halt any document destruction and demanded a forensic examination of the company servers. Judge Harmon, clearly disturbed by this development, granted our motion. The forensic examination revealed multiple deleted files, including the original drafts of Dad's contested will and emails between Mom, James, and Thomas, discussing how to ensure I would be excluded from leadership. Most damning was a recovered email from Thomas to Mom dated 2 days after Dad's diagnosis. This unfortunate situation presents an opportunity to implement the succession plan we've discussed. W's current will presents obstacles, but those can be addressed while he's undergoing treatment. The tide was turning, but we still lacked the smoking gun that would conclusively prove forgery of the final will. That came from an unexpected source. Thomas Brennan's assistant, facing scrutiny in the ongoing investigation, provided Sarah with copies of billing records showing Thomas had charged hours to the Mitchell estate for will revision consultations on days when Dad was demonstrably in surgery or heavily sedated. With mounting evidence of misconduct, Mom made her first attempt at reconciliation, a private settlement offer delivered by a junior associate from her legal team. 40% ownership, a board seat, and a public reconciliation, Sarah summarized after reviewing the offer. It's substantially better than their previous position. I considered it briefly before shaking my head. They think I'm doing this for money or power. This has always been about Dad's wishes and the people who depend on the company. We keep going. Mom's health began to deteriorate under the stress, or so her lawyers claimed, when requesting yet another postponement. James, meanwhile, was spotted in Monaco the same weekend, photographed on a yacht with celebrities. The final pieces fell into place when Dad's original will was discovered in a locked drawer in Thomas's home office during a warranted search related to the forgery investigation. The document, the one naming me as primary heir and successor, had been marked for shredding but inexplicably preserved. As we prepared for what promised to be the final hearing, James made one last desperate attempt to settle, this time offering me full control of the company in exchange for dropping all criminal charges against him, Mom, and Thomas. He's running scared, Sarah observed. The evidence of financial fraud is overwhelming. He's looking at potential criminal charges. I declined the offer. This had moved beyond a family dispute to a matter of justice for Dad, for the employees who had been mistreated, and for the integrity of everything Dad had built. On the morning of the final hearing, I received an anonymous envelope containing banking records showing transfers from Mitchell Enterprises to offshore accounts controlled by James totaling over $12 million. The stage was set for the final confrontation the moment I would walk into that courtroom with the truth finally on my side. Armed with mounting evidence and Uncle Robert's financial backing, our legal team expanded. Sarah brought in forensic accountants, handwriting experts, and a medical specialist who reviewed Dad's treatment records. The narrative was shifting from a troubled daughter's delusions to a serious case of criminal conspiracy. Uncle Robert's support proved invaluable beyond just finances. His connections in the business community opened doors that Mom and James had tried to slam shut. Old colleagues of Dad's, initially reluctant to get involved, began reaching out after Uncle Robert vouched for me. "Your father was respected in ways your mother and brother never understood," Uncle Robert told me. "People worked with him because of his integrity, not just his money. That counts for something." We adopted a new strategy focusing on the business mismanagement rather than just the contested will. This approach struck at James's Achilles heel. His terrible business decisions were impossible to hide, especially as the company's stock continued to plummet. Jennifer, though fired, had maintained relationships with other employees who provided regular updates on the company's deterioration. 3 major clients had pulled their projects. A bank had withdrawn financing for the Westlake development. The company's credit rating had been downgraded. "James is driving Dad's company into the ground," I told Sarah during a strategy session. "Even if I win the inheritance case, there might not be much left to save." "Then we need to move faster," she replied. "And we need to make sure the board understands exactly what's happening." We prepared a detailed financial analysis showing the company's decline under James's leadership compared to its performance during Dad's final years. The report was anonymously delivered to each board member before their quarterly meeting. The reaction was swift. James was called to an emergency board session to explain the discrepancies. According to our source, he was evasive and combative, blaming market conditions and inherited problems from Dad's management. As pressure mounted, Mom's health genuinely began to suffer. She was hospitalized briefly for what was described as exhaustion and anxiety. James, however, showed no signs of stress, at least not publicly. He continued his lavish lifestyle, even purchasing a new sports car the same week the company announced a hiring freeze. This tone-deaf behavior worked in our favor. Employees who had remained loyal to the Mitchell name became increasingly disillusioned. Some began reaching out directly, offering information about questionable business practices they'd witnessed. Our most significant break came from an unexpected source. Amanda Winters, James's girlfriend and the owner of the shell company Pinnacle Consulting, contacted Sarah, requesting a private meeting. "I want immunity," she stated flatly when we met at Sarah's office. "James is going down and I'm not going with him." Amanda revealed that Pinnacle had been created specifically to siphon money from Mitchell Enterprises. James had promised to marry her once he secured his position, and they would use the embezzled funds to start a new life abroad. "He never intended to run the company long-term," Amanda explained. "The plan was to extract as much value as possible, then sell it off piecemeal to developers." She provided access to Pinnacle's accounts showing transfers totaling nearly $5 million, significantly more than we'd previously documented. She also confirmed that James had orchestrated the break-ins at my apartment and had been monitoring my communications through spyware installed on my devices. With Amanda's cooperation secured through a formal immunity agreement, we escalated our legal offensive. Sarah filed amended complaints with the newly acquired evidence and petitioned for a temporary restraining order, preventing James from making any major company decisions pending resolution of the case. The restraining order was granted, sending shockwaves through the company. For the first time, employees and business partners saw tangible evidence that James's position might not be secure. His response was both predictable and desperate. Anonymous threats began coming to my temporary residence. My car's brake lines were tampered with, fortunately discovered during a routine service before any harm occurred. A smear campaign appeared in local business publications with sources close to the family, claiming I had a history of mental instability and substance abuse. Most alarming was a break-in at Uncle Robert's home. Nothing was stolen, but his home office was ransacked, and the copy of Dad's original will was missing. Security footage showed two masked figures, but their identities were impossible to determine. "They're panicking," Sarah observed when I called her about the break-in. "This kind of escalation means we're getting close to something they desperately want to hide." I relocated again, this time to a secured apartment building with 24-hour surveillance. I set up elaborate security protocols using burner phones, varying my routes to meetings, and keeping physical copies of key evidence in multiple secure locations. Frank Monroe, the investigator who had betrayed me, reached out through an intermediary, claiming he wanted to make things right. According to his message, he had been threatened and paid off by James, but was now willing to testify about their arrangement. "It's a trap," Uncle Robert warned when I considered meeting him. "They're trying to lure you out or plant false information." I agreed, but instead of ignoring Frank's outreach, we used it to our advantage. Sarah arranged a meeting but sent her paralegal in my place, equipped with a recording device. Frank, unaware of the switch, revealed that James had instructed him to offer fabricated evidence that would discredit our case if presented in court. This attempted setup became another piece of evidence, showing the lengths James would go to maintain control. Our counterattack culminated in a brilliant sting operation designed by Sarah. We leaked misinformation, suggesting we had located a key witness, Dad's night nurse, who was prepared to testify about unusual visitors during his heavily medicated periods. No such witness existed, but James took the bait. He was recorded attempting to bribe the person he believed to be the nurse, offering money for altered testimony. The recording, obtained legally through police cooperation, became our most damning piece of evidence yet. "I don't care what you have to say," James was heard saying on the recording. "Just make sure it supports the narrative that my father was lucid when he changed his will. There's 50,000 if you do it right, nothing if you mess up." With this recording in hand, Sarah filed for an immediate hearing. The judge, clearly disturbed by the mounting evidence of criminal activity, scheduled proceedings for the following week. The night before this critical hearing, I received a call from Mom. It was the first time we'd spoken directly in months. "Rachel," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered, "this has gone too far. People are getting hurt." "People have been hurt from the beginning," I replied. "Dad was hurt. The employees who lost their jobs were hurt. I was hurt. I never wanted this level of ugliness," she continued. "James has become someone I don't recognize." For a moment I allowed myself to hope that she was having a genuine change of heart. Then she made her real purpose clear. "If you drop the case now, we can still salvage something of this family. James will step down as CEO. You can have the position with some oversight from the board. We'll be a family again." "It's too late for that, Mom," I said quietly. "The evidence doesn't just show a disputed will. It shows criminal conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Those aren't family matters that can be swept under the rug." "You would send your own brother to prison, your own mother." Her voice hardened. "Think carefully about what kind of person that makes you, Rachel." "I'm my father's daughter," I replied. "I keep my promises." I hung up, knowing that the next day would determine not just the future of Mitchell Enterprises, but whether justice would finally be served for Dad's betrayed trust. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when I arrived the next morning. News of the recording and allegations of criminal conspiracy had transformed a family inheritance dispute into the biggest business scandal the city had seen in years. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The gallery behind Mom and James was noticeably thinner than before, fair-weather supporters abandoning the sinking ship. By contrast, our side had grown. Former employees, business associates who had kept their distance until now, even 2 board members sat behind me in a show of support. Mom looked smaller somehow, her designer suit hanging loosely on her frame, her usual perfect makeup not quite concealing the strain. James maintained his arrogant facade, but his constant fidgeting betrayed his nervousness. Judge Harmon entered, her expression grim. Before we proceed, I want to address the recording that has been submitted to this court. Mr. Mitchell, these are serious allegations of witness tampering. Your attorney has submitted a motion claiming entrapment, which I have reviewed and denied. This recording will be admitted into evidence. James's attorney immediately requested a brief recess, which was granted. They huddled in the corner of the courtroom, voices low but gestures animated. When they returned to their table, a new tension filled the air. Your Honor, James's attorney began, in light of recent developments, my client would like to propose a settlement agreement that would resolve all outstanding issues. Sarah and I exchanged glances. This was the moment we'd been working toward when they realized their position was untenable. Mr. Mitchell proposes transferring controlling interest in Mitchell Enterprises to Miss Rachel Mitchell, effective immediately. In exchange, Miss Mitchell would agree to drop all claims related to financial impropriety and potential criminal charges. Judge Harmon turned to our table. Miss Jackson, does your client wish to consider this offer? Sarah looked to me and I shook my head slightly. Your Honor, while we appreciate the acknowledgement of Miss Mitchell's rightful position, we cannot accept an agreement that shields potentially criminal behavior from proper investigation. The judge nodded, seeming to have expected this response. Then we will proceed with today's hearing. What followed was the most dramatic day of testimony yet. The forensic accountant detailed the pattern of financial fraud, showing clearly how funds had been systematically diverted through shell companies. The handwriting expert demonstrated the discrepancies in Dad's supposed signature on the contested will. Most damaging was the testimony of Dr. Stern's former nurse, who had finally agreed to come forward after receiving subpoena protection. Mr. Mitchell's medication was increased significantly beyond prescribed levels when his son and wife were scheduled to visit, she testified. The orders came directly from Dr. Stern, who said it was at the family's request to keep him comfortable. Throughout the testimony, I watched Mom's face. The carefully maintained mask of maternal concern was crumbling, revealing glimpses of the calculating woman beneath. James, by contrast, became increasingly agitated, whispering furiously to his attorney and scribbling angry notes. During a brief recess, Mom approached me in the hallway. For the first time, there was no pretense in her expression. You don't understand what you're doing, she said, her voice low. Your father's company was built on more than just hard work and integrity. There are arrangements, understandings with people you don't want to cross. James knows how to manage those relationships. You don't. Are you threatening me, Mom? I asked, keeping my voice steady. I'm trying to protect you even now, she replied. Some things are better left alone. Take the company if you must, but drop the criminal investigation. For your own safety. Before I could respond, Sarah appeared at my side. Mrs. Mitchell, any further communication with my client should go through me. And I should warn you that anything you say could be considered witness tampering or obstruction of justice at this point. Mom's eyes hardened. You always were stubborn, Rachel, just like your father. She turned and walked away, her shoulders rigid. When court resumed, the atmosphere had changed. James's attorney requested another private conference with the judge. When they emerged from chambers, Judge Harmon made an announcement that stunned the courtroom. In light of evidence that has come to the court's attention, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Furthermore, I am granting a temporary injunction freezing all assets of James Mitchell, Patricia Mitchell, Thomas Brennan, and their associated entities pending further investigation. James stood abruptly, his face contorted with rage. This is ridiculous. She's lying about everything. Dad knew she couldn't handle the company. That's why he changed his will. Mr. Mitchell, control yourself, Judge Harmon warned. This whole thing is a setup, he continued, ignoring her. Rachel has always been jealous of me. Mr. Mitchell, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. James fell silent, but the damage was done. His mask of confident competence had finally cracked, completely revealing the entitled, desperate man beneath. The hearing concluded with a series of orders. A court-appointed forensic team would take control of Mitchell Enterprises' financial records. The contested will was deemed invalid based on evidence of forgery and undue influence. And most importantly, Dad's original will, the one naming me as his successor, was provisionally reinstated pending final verification. As we left the courthouse, a reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "Miss Mitchell, how does it feel to take back your father's company?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. This was never about taking something for myself. It was about honoring my father's wishes and protecting the company he built and the people who helped him build it. There's a lot of damage to repair, but I'm ready to get started. Sarah squeezed my arm supportively as we made our way through the crowd. "We're not done yet," she reminded me. "The criminal investigation will take time and they'll fight every step of the way. But today was a major victory." Back at our temporary headquarters, the team celebrated cautiously. The initial battle had been won, but we knew the war was far from over. Uncle Robert raised a glass of champagne. To William, he said simply, he would be proud. As the others toasted, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Watch your back. This isn't over." I deleted it without comment, refusing to let their intimidation tactics spoil this moment. That night alone in my secured apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened and what was still to come. The company was in serious financial trouble after James's mismanagement. Employees had been traumatized by the chaos and uncertainty, and my own family had been revealed as people I hardly recognized. Yet despite everything, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. Dad had trusted me with his legacy and I wouldn't let him down. Tomorrow would begin the hard work of rebuilding not just the company but my own life from the ashes of betrayal. I fell asleep looking at a photo of Dad and me at a construction site, both of us in hard hats, his arm around my shoulders and pride shining in his eyes. For the first time in over a year, I slept peacefully through the night. The 6 weeks following the injunction were a whirlwind of activity. With court approval, I took temporary control of Mitchell Enterprises while the final verification of Dad's original will proceeded. The company was in worse shape than even I had realized. My first day back in the office, Dad's office, which James had redecorated with ostentatious artwork and furniture, I discovered the extent of the damage. 3 major development projects were on the verge of collapse. The company's credit line was nearly maxed out. Vendor relationships had deteriorated to the point where some refused to work with us without payment in advance. Most concerning was employee morale. The toxic culture James had created left deep scars. People worked in isolation, afraid to share information or collaborate. Many of the most talented team members had already left. "It's going to take time to rebuild trust," Barbara Chen told me as we assessed the situation. Having been demoted under James's leadership, she had valuable perspective on what had gone wrong. "People are afraid of getting caught in another power struggle. Then we start with transparency," I decided. My first official act was an all-hands meeting where I laid out exactly what had happened and the challenges we faced. "I won't pretend this will be easy," I told the assembled staff. "The road back will be difficult. Some projects may need to be scaled back or restructured. But what I can promise is this: no more secrets, no more fear, and no decisions that put short-term profits above the company's integrity or your well-being." While working to stabilize the company, I had to simultaneously prepare for the final court hearing that would permanently establish the validity of Dad's original will and address the criminal charges against Mom, James, and their accomplices. Sarah warned me that they would be fighting desperately to avoid prison. "The evidence against them is strong, but never underestimate what cornered people will do to escape consequences." She was right. 2 weeks before the hearing, a former employee came forward claiming I had asked him to falsify documents to support our case. It took only 3 days to prove he had been paid to make these allegations, but the smear made headlines before being debunked. Next came a more sophisticated attack. Financial records appeared, suggesting Dad had been engaging in questionable accounting practices for years, implying that any financial misconduct by James was merely continuing established patterns. These forgeries were better executed but still fell apart under expert scrutiny. Most disturbing was the pressure being applied to our witnesses. Barbara received threatening phone calls. Jennifer's parents, who lived in another state, reported strange cars parked outside their home. Uncle Robert's prize horse mysteriously fell ill, though it recovered after prompt veterinary care. "They're getting desperate," Sarah observed. "Each attempt is more reckless than the last." James had been conspicuously absent since the injunction, reportedly traveling in Europe. Mom remained in the family home but had withdrawn from public view, citing health concerns. Thomas Brennan had resigned from his law firm and was under investigation by the State Bar Association. 3 days before the hearing, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Stern, Dad's oncologist and Mom's apparent longtime friend. "I want to make a deal," he said without preamble. "Immunity in exchange for everything I know about Patricia and James's actions during your father's illness." Sarah arranged for him to meet with the district attorney, and his testimony became the final piece of our case. Dr. Stern confirmed that he had deliberately overmedicated Dad during the critical period when the fraudulent will was created at Patricia's explicit request. He also verified that Dad had been lucid and clear about his succession plans during their private consultations, plans that always included me as his chosen successor. The morning before the final hearing, I arrived at the office early to review my testimony one last time. On my desk was an unmarked envelope that had somehow bypassed building security. Inside was a USB drive containing banking records showing transfers from Mitchell Enterprises to accounts in the Cayman Islands controlled by James Transfers, totaling over $12 million, far more than we had previously documented. A note accompanying the drive read simply, "Not everyone was fooled. Good luck tomorrow." The handwriting matched Amanda's, suggesting she was providing additional evidence beyond what she'd already shared through official channels. While I questioned her motives, the information was too valuable to ignore. Sarah arrived at my office within the hour to review the new evidence. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, examining the records. "These transfers occurred after the injunction, which means James violated a direct court order. The judge will have no choice but to refer this for criminal prosecution." As we finalized our preparations, I received word that James had returned to the country and would be present at tomorrow's hearing. Mom's attorney had requested she be excused due to health concerns, but Judge Harmon had denied the request, insisting all parties must appear. That night, I returned to the small apartment I'd been renting since being forced from the family home. Though I could have moved back to the house after gaining temporary control of the company, something about the space still felt tainted by betrayal. As I reviewed my notes one final time, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Rachel," she said, her voice uncharacteristically subdued, "I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness, but I want you to understand why I did what I did." "I'm listening," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Your father wasn't the saint you believe him to be," she continued. "When we married, he promised me security and status. Instead, he poured everything into that company, leaving nothing for me, except when it served his image as the successful family man. James understood my sacrifice. You were always too blinded by hero worship to see the truth." I let the silence stretch between us, waiting for more, but she had apparently said all she came to say. "Is that it?" I finally asked. "That's your justification for drugging Dad, manipulating him when he was dying and trying to steal everything he built?" "You see it your way, I see it mine," she replied stiffly. "I've made my peace with what's coming. Have you?" The call ended, leaving me unsettled. Was this a genuine attempt to explain herself, or another manipulation tactic? Either way, it changed nothing about what I needed to do tomorrow. I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of Dad, not sick and diminished as he'd been at the end, but strong and vibrant as he'd been throughout my childhood, standing at construction sites with blueprints in hand showing me how to read, them teaching me to see not just what was there but what could be. I woke before dawn with his voice echoing in my mind. It's not just buildings, Rachel. It's what happens inside them that matters. With that thought carrying me forward, I dressed carefully in a navy suit. Dad had always gathered my files and headed to the courthouse for the final confrontation. The media presence had grown exponentially since our last appearance. News vans lined the street and reporters called out questions as I made my way up the steps with Sarah at my side. I maintained the composed silence we had agreed upon, saving my words for the courtroom. Inside, the gallery was completely full. I recognized faces from every phase of this journey: employees, business associates, friends who had stood by me, and others who had abandoned me, but now sought to re-establish connections. And then, at the defendant's table, I saw them together for the first time in months, Mom looking pale but immaculately dressed. James, his usual arrogance visibly strained. Thomas Brennan noticeably thinner and gray-faced. And Dr. Stern seated slightly apart, the only one whose expression showed clear remorse. As I took my seat and arranged my files, I caught Mom's eye. She smiled slightly, that same confident smile I had seen at the beginning of this ordeal. James didn't look up from his papers, his shoulders tense. They still believed they might somehow escape the consequences of their actions. They had no idea what was coming. Judge Harmon called the court to order precisely at 9 o'clock. The tension in the room was palpable as she addressed the assembled parties. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that this proceeding will determine 3 separate but related matters, she stated, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. First, the final verification and execution of William Mitchell's original will. Second, the permanent control of Mitchell Enterprises. And third, the referral of potential criminal charges based on evidence presented to this court. She nodded to Sarah. Miss Jackson, you may present your first witness. Rather than calling a witness immediately, Sarah requested permission to play the video testimony Dad had recorded before his death, the one previously ruled inadmissible. In the weeks since that ruling, Sarah had worked with forensic experts to authenticate the recording and establish the chain of custody, addressing the judge's previous concerns. Your Honor, we have now verified this recording's authenticity beyond question, Sarah explained. The sworn statements from the notary and witnesses present during its creation have been submitted to the court. After reviewing the new documentation, Judge Harmon reversed her earlier ruling. The video testimony will be admitted. As Dad's face appeared on the courtroom screen, I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. Dad looked tired, but clear-eyed, sitting in his home office before the illness had taken its full toll. I, William Mitchell, being of sound mind, make this recording to clarify my wishes regarding the succession of leadership at Mitchell Enterprises and the distribution of my assets, he began formally. While I have executed legal documents to this effect, recent events have given me reason to create this additional record. He went on to detail his explicit intention that I take over as CEO and majority shareholder, with specific provisions for Mom's financial security and a role for James that matched his capabilities rather than his ambitions. Most damning was his direct reference to concerns about undue influence. Patricia and James have repeatedly pressured me to reconsider my succession plans. Dad stated, his expression grave. I want to be absolutely clear that any documents contradicting the will executed on March 15th of this year should be considered suspect and potentially created under duress or through deception. When the video ended, the courtroom remained silent. The impact of seeing and hearing Dad deliver this testimony, his intelligence and determination evident despite his illness, was powerful. I glanced at the defense table. Mom's composed facade had cracked, revealing a flash of genuine fear. James was visibly seething, whispering furiously to his attorney. Sarah proceeded methodically through our evidence. The forensic accountant detailed the financial malfeasance, including the recently discovered offshore transfers. Dr. Stern, now a cooperating witness, confirmed the deliberate over-medication of Dad during critical periods. Barbara testified about documents she had been instructed to destroy by James immediately after Dad's death. Most powerful was the testimony of Dad's night nurse, who had finally agreed to come forward after being granted immunity for her reluctant role in the medication scheme. Mrs. Mitchell would instruct me to give additional doses before she and James visited. She testified, her voice steady despite obvious discomfort. When I expressed concern about exceeding the prescribed amount, she said Dr. Stern had approved it. When Mr. Rachel visited alone, I was told to reduce the medication so he would be more comfortable. The defense attorneys fought vigorously, attempting to undermine each witness and challenging the admissibility of various evidence. But the cumulative weight of testimony was overwhelming. By the lunch recess, even James's typically aggressive attorney appeared subdued. During the break, Sarah received word that James had attempted to book a private flight to a non-extradition country. The information was promptly relayed to Judge Harmon, who ordered his passport surrendered immediately. When proceedings resumed, the defense shifted strategy dramatically. Rather than continuing to fight each piece of evidence, they attempted to separate the parties, with James's attorney suggesting that Mom and Thomas had been the primary architects of the scheme, with his client merely following their guidance. Mom's attorney similarly tried to distance her from the most serious allegations, painting her as a woman manipulated by her trusted lawyer and doctor, acting out of misguided maternal concern rather than malice. The strategy collapsed when Sarah presented emails between all parties, clearly demonstrating their coordinated efforts. The final blow came with the playing of James's recorded attempt to bribe the witness, the sting operation that had marked our first major breakthrough. By late afternoon, Judge Harmon had heard enough. She recessed court briefly to review all submitted evidence in her chambers. When she returned, her expression was stern. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, she began, "This court finds the will dated March 15 to be the valid and legal expression of William Mitchell's wishes. The subsequent document is hereby declared fraudulent and void." She continued with deliberate precision. Permanent control of Mitchell Enterprises is awarded to Rachel Mitchell in accordance with the legitimate will. Furthermore, I am referring James Mitchell, Patricia Mitchell, Thomas Brennan, and Maxwell Stern to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution on charges including fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and financial crimes. Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Brennan are remanded into custody immediately as flight risks. As court officers approached James, the facade finally shattered completely. "This is your fault," he shouted at Mom. "Your idea to change the will, your plan to medicate him, I told you it was too risky." Mom's face went ashen as her son publicly implicated her in open court. Her attorney quickly intervened, but the damage was done. James was led away, still shouting accusations. Mom left between her attorneys, refusing to look at me as she passed. Outside, the courthouse reporters clamored for statements. With Sarah beside me, I addressed the media briefly. Today, justice was served not just for my father but for everyone affected by the betrayal of his trust. Mitchell Enterprises will return to the principles of integrity and excellence that my father established. I'm grateful to everyone who stood by me and helped uncover the truth. The following weeks were consumed with implementing the court's ruling and cooperating with the ongoing criminal investigation. James ultimately accepted a plea deal, receiving a 7-year sentence for financial crimes. Mom, leveraging her previously unblemished record and health concerns, received 3 years of house arrest and was required to pay substantial restitution. Thomas Brennan was disbarred and sentenced to 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. The company's recovery began slowly but steadily. I rehired key employees who had been dismissed, including Jennifer as our new compliance officer. Barbara returned to her position as executive assistant, with added responsibilities and compensation that recognized her loyalty. The toxic culture James had fostered was gradually replaced with one of transparency and collaboration. I established a foundation in Dad's name focused on ethical business practices and supporting the communities where we developed properties. The first project, funded by the foundation, was affordable housing on land Dad had purchased years earlier, a project James had tried to convert to luxury condominiums. Uncle Robert became a valued advisor, bringing his horse breeding business under the Mitchell Enterprises umbrella as a new division that quickly proved profitable. The relationship healed wounds from his long estrangement from Dad, a reconciliation that came too late for the brothers but provided some measure of resolution. 6 months after the final hearing, I visited Dad's grave on what would have been his birthday. The headstone was simple but elegant, reflecting his practical nature and understated class. I placed a small model building beside the flowers, a replica of our first major project together, the one he had let me lead independently. "We did it, Dad," I said quietly. "The company's back on track. The people who tried to steal your legacy are facing consequences. And I'm keeping my promise, taking care of the business and the people who depend on it." The autumn breeze rustled the leaves around the cemetery, and I felt a profound sense of peace for the first time since his diagnosis. The battle had been painful and costly, not just financially but emotionally. I had lost the illusion of family as I had understood it, but I had gained something more valuable: the truth, justice for Dad, and the chance to honor his legacy authentically. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the most important lesson from this ordeal. True family isn't always defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, honesty, and mutual respect values Dad had exemplified in his business relationships, even when they were lacking in his home life. I had lost a mother and brother but gained a family of choice among those who had stood by me when it mattered most. The company was healing. I was healing. And the future finally looked bright again. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey from betrayal to justice. If you've ever had to stand up against seemingly impossible odds, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How do you find the strength to fight when everything seems stacked against you? Please hit that like button if this resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of triumph over adversity, and share with someone who might need encouragement today. Remember, sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most meaningful victories. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for what's right.